When I just think about your loss, it moves me. I'm really just holding space for the fact that this has changed more than the world for you. It's changed everything. The way you think, the way you feel, the way you react, the way you view your future, the way you remember past memories. Literally everything changes when you experience this kind of a loss. It can be so confusing and conflicting. But I want to give just maybe a few ideas that could be helpful to normalize what you can expect throughout the grief process. First and foremost, you're going to be in shock and denial. It's almost like your brain plays a trick on you. You're wondering, did this really happen? Is this really real? Am I going to wake up? Can I go back and make different choices and get different outcomes? Your brain will literally tell you when the phone rings, it's going to be them. You'll have an event at your house and think that they're coming. You'll look forward to the future and remind yourself that you can't wait to see them. And then it's almost like you experience that loss again and again and again. I love to say that denial is like a warm, fuzzy blanket, and we want to stay under it as long as we can. But the reality is your loss is your loss. But your brain's not quite ready to accept it. And that's why we kind of get stuck in that denial and disbelief phase. But after that comes the sadness phase. And the sadness phase can be as deep and as wide and as long as the biggest, deepest ocean. And we sometimes get lost in that, and just wave after wave can sweep over us. And the sadness feels so huge that sometimes we think we're going to die because we're so incredibly sad. And sometimes we're just living breath to breath, second to second, heartbeat to heartbeat, because the pain is so immense. But sometimes even the sadness gives way to deep anger, hatred, resentment. Sometimes we'll even black out because we're so angry and we just need someone to blame. We need this to be someone's fault, and we need them to pay. Revenge is often a normalized part of grief. We want to know whose fault this is, and we want them to hurt as bad as we hurt. And after we spend some time in anger, which again is a normalized part of the grief process, it's not unhealthy to be angry. It's healthy to feel it, express it, and experience it. And then we go to the bargaining phase. And I think for parents, sometimes this can just be the heaviest phase, because we'll start to think, what if I had done this? Would there be a different outcome? What if I'd not done this? What if I had just? What if I had just? And that can plague us. We can wake up in the middle of the night with those thoughts. We can stop in the middle of what seems to be a good day with those thoughts. And that's that bargaining phase of grief, while we're trying to figure out how we can get some reprieve from this devastating loss. What could we have done to make a difference, to have a different outcome? All of our brains need to be allowed to process that. There's nothing wrong with you if you're in that bargaining phase of grief. It can actually help you move on to the final phase of grief, which is really, the idea is called resolution. And it does not mean that you're ever going to be over your traumatic loss, because you're not. It just means that one day you'll begin to believe that life will go on and life will have meaning. And so while I love Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, I really like Worden's task of grief. And maybe I'll just challenge you with a task of grief today. And that is that you would find a way to memorialize that person that you've lost. You'll find a meaningful way to take them with you forward into the future. Maybe it is sharing your story. Maybe it's educating others. Maybe it's a memorial that you want to set out on a countryside or at a cemetery or even in your own home. But you find a way to make sure that your mind and your heart are always in a state of remembrance. I think we can be really, really fearful that the person that we loved and cared about so much is going to be lost or forgotten. So a task of grief for you, an assignment that I'd love to leave you with, is just that idea. How will you remember? How will you celebrate the life? How will you make sure that honor is given where honor is due? That's an important task for you to do as you begin this important work of healing. I think one of the things that can plague survivors and their families is the unknown that surrounds what happened. So many times people think, well, was it a death by suicide? Did they die by suicide? Did they die by overdose? Exactly what happened. And there's so many questions that we just don't always know the answer to. But then there's that stigma attached to substance use and overdose and substance use abusers that can really limit our ability to share a story in a meaningful way. We feel shame and guilt attached to that because there are just so many unknowns. And I want to normalize that, but also I want to offer a different perspective. Is that really in our work with the families, you are a survivor of a traumatic loss yourself. And while you're really caring about the person that you lost and you want to protect them and your reputation, I want to just invite you to really allow yourself to matter. You need to share your story. You need empathy and care and connection. And you need to have those free from any worry or concern that you might be judged or condemned or ostracized. You're going to find your people who care. You're going to find your people who care no matter what. And then you'll find people who are just curious. They want to know what's happening. I want to normalize that. People don't always know a lot about fentanyl overdose or fentanyl loss or death by fentanyl. They just don't know. They don't even know how to refer to it or what to say. And that can be a tough space to sit in. But ultimately, your concern now is for you. How can you get the care and connection that you need? Who do you trust? Who's your community? Who can you talk to free from any fear of judgment? I want to give you permission to move toward those people and move away from those people that you think might judge you or ostracize you or just not understand. You know, there can be nothing worse than talking to somebody who uses all kinds of platitudes and statements because they want to feel better by making you feel better. The fact of the matter is you feel bad. And you need a friend, a confidant who allows you to just feel bad. This is horrible. This is hard. This is more difficult than anything you've ever experienced in your life. And nobody can say something in a quick sentence or two that's going to make it better or take the pain away. In taking care of yourself, invite your friends and trusted advisors and confidants to say the name of the person you lost. Sometimes they might try and avoid that because they think, well, if I say their name, it might make them think of them or remind them of them or make them sad. But the truth is, hearing their name is sometimes music to your ears and you're already sad. They're not going to make you more sad than you already are. You're already in that state of sadness. And sometimes you just really need somebody who's willing to and able to remember with you. To remember how great they were. To remember how much you loved them, to remember how much they loved them. And speaking that name can be so healing for you, and it can be healing for them in your community. So go ahead and find your people, and I give you permission to have some boundaries around those people who are not your people, who don't understand, who are judgmental or harsh. You get to decide. This is a season where you have to stop and think about and take care of yourself. But I know I'm speaking to some moms and dads and grandparents and aunt and uncles who think, well, what about children who are survivors? What about siblings who are survivors? Who's going to take care of them? That's a tough question, but I want to remind you of this. You are always modeling how you're handling this. And some days, all you can do is cry, and that's okay. Just as long as you give them permission to have days where all they do is cry. And some days you're just really angry, and that's okay. It's a normalized part of grief, but we have to empower them and give them permission that some days they're just angry. So in the immediacy of the loss and even months and years following, we have to just be kinder to one another. We have to understand that this loss has had a significant impact, and we're not just going to get over it. Sometimes we can even feel pressure from people. Oh, you're not over that loss yet? Well, as a clinician, I can tell you that I cannot tell you how long it's going to take you to recover or heal or get to resolution or that finding meaning stage of grief. I'm just going to be able to tell you that it's going to take some time. And I want to empower you to take however much time it takes. Really, stop and understand that this important work of healing is a sign of how significant the loss was. You know, when great love is lost, it's deeply, deeply mourned. And that's not something that we can just get over in a week or a month or a year because our grief or pain makes other people uncomfortable. Find people who can sit with that. Those are your people. And then you sit with your kids, sit with the siblings, sit with the good friends, and you hold that exact same space for them. No expectations right now. This is not a time to be working on becoming the best you can be. This is a time to be working on holding space for just how bad this hurts and just how horrible it is. And in doing that, you'll begin to model to others just how important it is that we're real with ourselves and our own emotions, and it invites them to be real with us anytime they need to be. Do this important work. No guilt, no expectations, just tons of grace for this moment to make it to the next. That's the only expectation.